At 1:13 in the morning, the moon above Lantern Street turned the color of a coal ember. Mara Venn was alone in the upper room of the city observatory, listening to an old receiver breathe through the static. She had spent 11 years preserving records no one visited anymore. Weather logs, lighthouse reports, radio transcripts, and the thin paper ledgers that told the story of the city before its towers became bright enough to hide the stars. Most nights, the receiver offered nothing but the ordinary noises of distance. A fishing beacon blinking across the bay, a weather station speaking in clipped numbers, the soft electrical hiss that filled the gaps between known things. Then, at exactly 1:13, the needle moved. Mara looked up. A single tone passed through the room. It was low, almost musical, and so clean that the dust on the receiver's speaker seemed to tremble with it. 3 seconds later, the tone returned. Then again, 7 times in all. She wrote the sequence in the margin of her logbook. 3 short pulses, 1 long pulse, 2 short pulses. It sounded like a code, but not one she recognized. The signal disappeared before she could switch on the modern recorder. When she replayed the moment from memory, the tape held only rain. Mara checked the roof camera. The red moon hung above the old water tower. No aircraft crossed the sky. No storm cell sat over the city. The observatory's antenna was pointed toward the eastern ridge, but the signal had seemed to come from below her, somewhere inside Lantern Street itself. She opened the observatory's archive map and searched the sequence through the handwritten indexes. Nothing. At 1:19, the receiver clicked again. This time, a row of numbers appeared on the digital display. 41, 7, 19, 3. Mara stared at them until the red light from the moon reached the window. 4 years earlier, she had learned that the city's old maps used numbers differently. They did not mark streets. They marked doors, stairwells, and service corridors. Places built before anyone thought the city would need to remember them. She took her coat from the chair. Before leaving, she placed one hand on the receiver's metal case. It was cold, but beneath her palm she felt a faint vibration, steady as a heartbeat. On the roof, the wind carried the smell of wet stone. The whole city looked ordinary below her. Traffic lights changing for empty intersections, office windows glowing without witnesses, and the river carrying pieces of red moonlight toward the dark harbor. Mara folded the map into her pocket. If the signal returned, she intended to be listening. The first coordinate led Mara to the basement of the old Meridian Hotel, a building that had been closed since the city's eastern rail line moved underground. Its front doors were chained, but the side entrance still opened with the brass key used by municipal archivists. Inside, the hotel smelled of damp carpet and plaster. Water ticked somewhere behind the walls. The lobby clock had stopped at 1:13, its hands fixed beneath a film of dust. Mara raised her flashlight. A line of faded brass numbers ran along the baseboard. 41, 7, 19, 3. She followed them through a service corridor and found a narrow room filled with rolled maps. Most showed the streets as they had been decades ago. One map, however, was spread across a table, as if someone had been studying it recently. The paper was covered with red pencil marks. Not streets, not buildings, gaps. Mara recognized the style immediately. Her former supervisor, Elias Vale, had drawn maps like this. He believed cities had 2 shapes, the shape people built and the shape people quietly depended on. Emergency stairs, unmarked shelters, rooftops connected by maintenance bridges. Places that were never celebrated because their only purpose was to be there when something went wrong. Elias had disappeared from the observatory records 6 years earlier. Not dramatically. He had simply stopped coming to work, returned his key, and left behind a note that said, "The city is losing its listening posts." Mara had assumed he meant the old radio towers. Now, she was not so sure. A second signal pulsed through the hotel. The sound came from inside the wall behind the map table. Mara pulled the table away and found a small copper plate fixed to the bricks. Its surface held a symbol, a lantern crossed by a thin wave. She touched it. A hidden latch released. Inside the wall was a narrow metal box, sealed with a wax stamp. The stamp showed a crescent moon crossed by a line of red thread. Mara broke it carefully and found a paper card, a brass key, and a sentence written in Elias's unmistakable handwriting. "When the moon is red, follow the signal beneath the city. Do not trust the newest map." Mara read the sentence twice. The newest map was the one she had carried from the observatory, the official map used by every department in the city. She unfolded it under the flashlight and compared it with Elias's red pencil marks. A service passage appeared on the old map, but not the new one. It ran beneath the hotel, crossed the abandoned rail line, and ended at a place labeled only with a single word: "Listen." The receiver in her coat clicked. The next sequence was shorter. 1 long pulse, 3 short pulses. Behind a wall, an old ventilation grate began to turn.
The passage beneath the Meridian Hotel was too narrow for a vehicle and too carefully constructed to be forgotten by accident. Ceramic tiles covered the ceiling. Copper wires ran beside the floor. Every few yards, a small glass circle had been set into the wall, allowing a person inside the passage to see the street above without being seen. Mara moved slowly, counting each turn. The city sounded different underground. Footsteps became distant knocks. Rain became a soft pressure against the ceiling. At one point, she heard a train pass overhead, though the Eastern Line had been closed for nearly a decade. After 12 minutes, the passage opened into a circular chamber. A chair stood in the center, facing a wall of instruments. Some were modern enough to recognize: a signal analyzer, a battery monitor, a compact recorder. Others belonged in a museum. A hand-cranked generator, a panel of tuning forks, a row of glass tubes filled with dark liquid. At the far end of the room, a red lamp blinked once. Mara placed Elias's brass key into a lock beneath the main console. The instruments woke in sequence. First the recorder, then the analyzer. Finally, a small printer began feeding out a strip of paper. The message was not a set of coordinates this time. It was a sentence. If the city stops listening, the quietest signal becomes the last one. Mara felt the room grow colder. A second strip emerged. North roof, old lantern, before the red light fades. She looked at the chamber's wall of instruments. Someone had built this station to receive signals from across the city, but also to send them. The copper wires connected to the old public address network, the one once used during storms and power failures. Elias had not been searching for a message from the sky. He had been maintaining a hidden system beneath the streets. On the desk sat a notebook protected by a clear cover. Mara opened it and found years of entries. A bridge inspection, a harbor siren, a hospital generator, a winter blackout. Beside each entry, Elias had written the same phrase: "Listen before you look." The final pages were newer. He had noticed that several listening posts were being dismantled during construction. The city had replaced them with digital systems, but no one had preserved the original frequencies. When the new systems failed, there would be no record of what the old network had heard.
Mara reached for the notebook's last page. It contained a hand-drawn symbol of a lantern and a wave, followed by a name she had never seen in the observatory files. Aura Sen. Below the name was a time. 1:14. The red lamp flashed again, faster now. Mara understood. The signal was not Elias's voice. It was a timed recording, designed to lead a future listener from one abandoned station to the next. Elias had not left a confession. He had left a trail. And somewhere above the city, the last station was waiting.
The north roof of the old municipal library had no public entrance. Its stairwell ended at a steel hatch painted the same gray as the surrounding walls. Mara climbed 6 flights, turned the brass key, and found herself beneath a sky washed in red light. The roof was crowded with equipment that no longer served any department. Wind vanes, a cracked weather dome, a row of small antennas bent toward different parts of the city. At the center stood an old lantern enclosed in wire mesh. It was not a street lamp. It was a signal lamp designed to flash through fog. Mara checked her watch. 1:13. The lantern lit. Not red. White. A narrow beam crossed the roof and touched the glass dome of the observatory on the eastern ridge. The beam returned a second later, reflected by a mirror hidden somewhere below. Then another light appeared across the city, and another. For a few breathless seconds, Lantern Street became a map of lights. Mara saw the path, the hotel, the abandoned rail line, the library, and a final point near the river. The network was still alive, weak, imperfect, but alive. Her receiver began to speak in bursts of sound. The sequence was too fast to write down, so she switched on the digital recorder. For the first time, the signal recorded clearly. A woman's voice emerged beneath the static. "If you are hearing this, you are standing where the city forgot to look." Mara froze. The voice belonged to Aura Sen. She continued. The listening stations were never built to protect buildings. They were built to protect the spaces between them. When the river rose, they carried warnings. When the power failed, they carried directions. When someone was lost, they carried a way home. The message paused. Elias believed the network belonged to the city. I believed it belonged to whoever was willing to maintain it. We were both wrong. It belongs to the person who hears a faint signal and decides it matters. The recording ended. Mara looked toward the river. A thin column of red light rose from the waterfront and vanished behind the warehouses. The last coordinate. She descended from the library roof and crossed the sleeping city on foot. The roads were shining after rain. A delivery truck passed without slowing. Above the rooftops, the blood moon began to lose its color. At the river, she found a warehouse with its windows boarded and its name removed. The brass key opened a side door. Inside, the air smelled of dust, rope, and old machinery. At the center of the empty floor stood a wooden table. On it rested a reel-to-reel recorder, a stack of blank forms, and a single envelope, addressed to whoever came next. Mara opened it. The first line said, "Do not restore the network. Restore the habit." The envelope contained no dramatic secret. There was no stolen fortune, no hidden crime, and no enemy waiting in the dark. There was a list. The list named people whose work had once kept Lantern Street connected. A ferry operator who knew which channel went quiet before a storm. A night nurse who tested the backup radio every evening. A bridge mechanic who listened for a change in the cables. A librarian who kept paper maps when every screen went blank. Beside each name was a frequency, a time, and one sentence describing what that person had heard. Mara recognized several locations: the Northern Bridge, the harbor stairs, the old market roof, the public library, the observatory. The network had not been a machine. It had been a habit shared by people who paid attention to small changes before they became large emergencies. At the bottom of the list was Aura Sen. She had been a communications engineer during the city's longest blackout. After the power returned, she began rebuilding the listening stations by hand. Elias had helped her, but their work had never appeared in the official records because no department wanted responsibility for a system that was mostly made of patience. Mara placed the paper beside the recorder and pressed play. Aura's voice returned, softer than before. Every city has a sound it makes when no one is watching. Water moving through pipes, wind under doors, a transformer beginning to fail, a person calling from a street that cannot be seen from the main road. The mistake is not that we miss these sounds. The mistake is believing they are too small to matter. Mara looked through the warehouse window. The red moon was fading to silver. She thought of Elias leaving the observatory. She thought of the sentence he had written. The city is losing its listening posts. He had not meant antennas. He had meant people. The recorder clicked and produced one final strip of paper. Your turn. Mara carried the list back to the observatory before sunrise. She did not call the city office. She did not send a report with a polite recommendation and wait for a committee to meet. Instead, she made copies. At 6:40, she placed the first copy on the desk of the bridge mechanic. At 7:05, she left one at the harbor station. At 7:30, she taped one inside the library's public notice case. On every copy, she wrote the same question. What do you notice after midnight that everyone else misses? By noon, people had begun to answer. A low hum under the southern bridge. A light that failed 3 seconds before the ferry bell. A patch of river mist that appeared only when the wind turned east. None of the notes seemed important by itself. Together, they formed a map. The city was speaking again. 3 weeks later, Mara returned to the observatory at 1:13 in the morning. The moon was ordinary. The sky was black. There was no red glow on the river, and no hidden lantern on the library roof. She switched on the old receiver anyway. For several minutes, it gave her nothing. Then, the needle moved. One short pulse, a pause. 2 short pulses, a long tone. Mara smiled, but she did not write it down. The signal was no longer asking to be decoded. It was asking to be answered. She pressed the transmit key. Across Lantern Street, the restored stations woke one by one. The bridge mechanic's lamp flashed. The harbor bell answered. A small light appeared in the library window, then another at the old Meridian Hotel. No announcement had been made. No official ceremony had been planned. The network simply continued because enough people had decided that quiet information deserved a place to go. Mara opened Elias Vale's old notebook and added a new entry. 1:13. Signal received. City listening. Beneath it, she wrote the question that had begun the whole search. What disappears when everyone looks in the same direction? Outside, the streets brightened with the first signs of morning. The red moon was gone, but the river still reflected a few lamps beneath the bridge. Mara watched them until the sun rose.
The mystery had not ended with a treasure or a villain. It had ended with a responsibility. Someone had left a signal in the dark, trusting that a stranger would believe it mattered. The stranger had answered. Then another person had answered. Then another. That was how a city remembered itself. Not all at once, and not because someone powerful commanded it to. It remembered itself through small acts of attention, repeated until they became impossible to erase. If you ever walk through Lantern Street after midnight, you may notice a pale light beneath the northern bridge. You may hear a low tone hidden beneath the river wind. You may even see a lamp blink once from the roof of the old library. If you do, stop for a moment. Listen before you look. And ask yourself what message might still be waiting for someone patient enough to hear it.